Good afternoon, everyone. It's rather, I suppose, encouraging to realize that Father Griego is clearly an optimist when he asks an Irishman to be concise. What planet has he been living on this last 2 years? I simply don't know. I remember many years ago when I was being trained, before I went to Econ in Switzerland, that when giving any kind of public speech or oration or conference, lecture, whatever, the essential thing is to immediately get a hold of your audience, say something really striking, something that makes them sit up, pay attention. So at this repeal conference where we are asked to vote no, I'm telling you now, I'm going to vote yes. And I'm going to exercise my pro-choice option, and I'm going to vote for compassion, for care, for dignity. In other words, I've been convinced in some way by the slogans of the Yes campaign. So yes, I'll vote yes, but on the day, because I have a vote, I'm an Irish citizen, I will simply vote no, because I want to be caring, I want to be compassionate, I want to show true respect and dignity, both for child and for mother, and I have no other choice, really, but to vote no. And I'm quite provocative in some respects, and I'm willing to ask, what part of no do some people not understand? No is no. When the Abortion Act was introduced in England, the Act came into being not so much in '67 when it was passed in Parliament, but the following year. And an article appeared in The Guardian, a left-wing British newspaper, but a quality newspaper, written by David Steele, the Liberal MP who was the sponsor of the bill. And among some interesting things he said, I will quote the following. The Roman Catholic opposition. I wish he hadn't used the word Roman. That's a slur. We're Catholic. The Roman Catholic opposition is the only one with the merit of logic and consistency. Note, logic and consistency. The loop, you know what it is. The loop which the civilized world is exporting massively to underdeveloped countries as a contraceptive is in fact sometimes an abortifacient at the earliest stage. Ethically, therefore, there can be no hard and fast distinction between its widespread use and the much rarer need for a medical termination in the early weeks of pregnancy. There is a direct link, as foretold by Pope Paul VI in '68 with the encyclical Humanae Vitae, between contraception, when it fails, and the fail-sure approach, abortion. The Catholic Church has always known that, has always expounded that, has explained that, and is quite happy, prepared to face the ridicule, the scorn, the derision of the entire world. The truth is the truth, a fact is a fact. And there is no argument, really, against the facts. What really distinguishes us Christians, all Christians who are pro-life, that's most Christians, but not all. What distinguishes the followers of Christ from the rest of the world is, in fact, the religious question. Something which has not come to the forelight in all the discussion throughout the country in relation to the abortion issue. It is the religious question, the Catholic position on life, marriage, natural law, morality, contraception, reason and truth, abortion and euthanasia, which differentiates us from everybody else. So in that sense, religion is a divisive instrument, if you like, and it's bound to create all kinds of controversy. On the 28th of February, 2011, a funeral mass took place in New York Cathedral, presided over by the now Cardinal Timothy Dolan. The deceased was extremely well known because in his lifetime he had been a very distinguished medical practitioner and one of the foremost specialists in the United States in obstetrics and gynecology. He is, by his own admission, in his work Aborting America, responsible for overseeing 60,000 abortions, 5,000 of which he himself performed, and one of which was on his own child in his girlfriend's womb. With the advances in medical science, especially scanning techniques and ultrasound, he began, still as an atheist, not as a Catholic, which he became later, but as an atheist, he began to have serious doubts. And his eventual adoption of Christian beliefs did not, strictly speaking, depend in the beginning on any religious dogma. So he then became one of the most dedicated, proactive people in caring for nascent life in the mother's womb. However, along the way, in terms of the conversion process, he told many, many truths. And the first one, he said, was that it was essential, and Father mentioned it briefly in his introduction. He said it was very, very important to make sure that the public at large, I'm now talking about the 1960s on, they had to be persuaded that abortion is a medical issue, not a moral one. And you know, and I know, this is the line that has been taken by many in Ireland today. Not an ethical question, not a moral issue, but simply a medical one. This obviously involves persuading people of the rather obvious falsehood, because it is a lie, that a normal pregnancy is a natural and healthy condition if the mother wants her baby, if she wants the baby. But if for whatever reason she doesn't want the baby, then we have to simply abort and maintain and restore her health. Pregnancy is not a disease. It's not a disease. It's not an illness. And you women know that. All women know that. Secondly, he, Nathanson, and his friends relentlessly and spectacularly lied about the number of women who died each year from illegal abortions. They lied. He says it very, very plainly. And I'm able to sort of quote him. He said, "We fed the public a line of deceit, dishonesty, a fabrication of statistics and figures. We succeeded, that is, in breaking down the laws limiting abortions, because the time was right. And the news media," I should say news media for the Americans among us, they understand better, and the news media simply reported it, cooperated with it. We sensationalized the effects of illegal abortions, fabricated polls which indicated that 85% of the public favored unrestricted abortion when we knew it was only 5%. We unashamedly lied, and yet our statements were quoted by the media as though they had been written in law. That's an address he gave in Winnipeg in 1981 in Canada. I tell you, maybe not as subtle as the Americans, but the same processes have been going on in Ireland for a very long time. I've been told that the best way to kill a frog is to put him into lukewarm water and gradually raise the temperature. He's unaware of any danger, of any manipulation, even of his body temperature, and so he dies. So you can draw the image, the inference for yourself. Thirdly, I'll not dwell on this one so much, but if you're going to wage a campaign, you need a scapegoat, you need an enemy. And so in the United States, the enemy that was chosen was the Catholic Church. So you make it what it truly wasn't, a Catholic issue. It wasn't. There were even atheists who opposed abortion, agnostics who opposed abortion, all kinds of Christian denominations who opposed abortion. But no, let's signal out the Catholic Church, which is what they did. So in other words, make it some kind of a religious dogma. And let's fight the whole issue now on the separation of church and state. And when you consider in recent decades the history in Ireland, where even the late Cardinal O'Fee could publicly state that he believed in the separation of church and state in Ireland, we're going back a long way. The ground was truly being well prepared, even by unwitting, foolish churchmen. And lastly, despite the historical fact, I suppose, now, that prohibitions of abortion were rooted in English common law and reinforced and expanded by statutes enacted across the United States by overwhelmingly Protestant majorities in the 19th century, Nathanson and the other abortion movement leaders decided that the Catholic Church was perfect for the role of freedom-smothering oppressor. Its male priesthood and authority structure would make it easy for them to depict the Church's opposition to abortion as some kind of misogyny, for which concern to protect unborn babies was a mere pretext. It's true, even today. The Catholic Church is afraid to speak out in Ireland because it has been consigned almost to the waste bin of history. They are afraid to speak. They've been cowed into submission. Oh, there are individual bishops who are exemplary. I attended a conference by one recently. Will not mention him, I will not embarrass him. But most of them are frightened to speak. They know what is right, they know what is wrong, but because of abuse scandals, they dare not raise their heads above the parapet. And that silence, with notable exceptions, is doing terrible damage to the pro-life cause in this country. And lastly, the abortion movement sought to appeal to conservatives and liberals alike by promoting feticide, infanticide, it is a form of homicide, as a way, would you believe it, of fighting poverty. Why are so many people poor? Only because they have more children than they can afford to care for. What's the solution? Abortion. Why do we have to spend so much money on welfare? It's because poor, mainly minority women, are burdening the taxpayer with more and more babies. Again, the solution? Abortion. Now, you might well want to know how a Catholic people, like the people of Ireland, could in such a short time actually embrace something that is so antithetical, so much in opposition to basic Christian teaching, above all Catholic teaching on the whole question of life. You're perfectly well aware, or you ought to be very well aware, that the retreat from Christianity began a long, long time ago, long before any of us in this room was born. Back even in England, in the time of Matthew Arnold, the Victorian period, the church was already, and that was the established Anglican church, was already in serious decline. And now in Ireland, over this last 4 or 5 decades, we realize also that the people in general, or large swathes of the people, are in retreat from Catholic teaching. John Paul II referred to it in Europe as a silent apostasy. That's what you need to understand. We have to come to terms with the new reality, confront it as best we can, while remaining true to the principles and the truths of faith and right reason, based on the natural law. And that law is engraved upon every human being. The old Athenian Socrates correctly observes that the unexamined life is not worth living. Man relentlessly pursues the truth of his being, for it is the primary object of his intelligence, just as the search for goodness is the goal of the exercise of his will. It is precisely in this respect that we are human beings, that we are spiritual beings. And a spirit is a being that knows and loves the truth, knows and loves goodness. There is a truth to be found. And once we've found it, we submit ourselves to it. And until fairly recent times, this was the common and universal practice of mankind. But it's no longer the case. It was Pope Pius XII who, during the war, stated that post-war man would be more changed than the map of post-war Europe. Now we have become the new breed of man he envisaged. We no longer, I know it's a generalization, not everyone, but for the most part, many. We no longer look up to find the God who created the heavens and the earth. And for the most part, we are no longer interested in him. And even if we still believe in him, he doesn't occupy a very great place in our lives. We have Irish people today, Catholic, baptized, possibly, certainly, in many cases, still attending Mass, who are saying, in contradictory fashion, I am pro-life, but I am also pro-choice. Work that one out. We are free to ignore God, doubt him, disregard him entirely, because we now believe, foolishly, that we have come of age. We are practicing what could be called an adult Christianity. For many others, God has become problematic. And in our newfound awareness of our independence and the exercise of our Promethean autonomy, we no longer need him, and so can cheerfully and confidently exercise all theological categories in our thinking. We can now be, strangely, fully human without God. And that is the modern world. And that is the world of modern Ireland, fast becoming that world. In other words, we don't need God, we don't need Christ, we don't need the church. It's in that changed context which separates the generations that we have the origin of the generation gap and the sea change in regard to abortion. There's no longer any truth that binds universally all consciences. We make our own truths, tailor-made to fit our needs and our wants. That is what is meant by relativism. An image of a modern dilemma comes to mind to express the direction that our countrymen may take if the Eighth Amendment is repealed. The image of the boat in Arthur Rimbaud's famous poem, The Drunken Boat, it was called, is an apt one in that it drifts endlessly rudderless out upon the waves. We are in danger of losing our moral compass. A nation that aborts its children has already lost its soul. So how are we, perhaps a former Catholic nation, how are we to reorient ourselves in a world without God? It's not just a post-Christian world, but it is a determinately anti-Catholic world. That, by the way, is the European vision. I'm not afraid to say it, because they're not afraid to say it. They say it openly. This is what they want. And we, for whatever reasons, don't seem to get the message. Oh, the government gets the message, because when there's a referendum that goes against what they want to introduce, they make you vote again and again. You've already had the experience. Well, okay, you fooled me once, shame on me, as they say. You fooled me twice, well, shame on you. They, the Europeans at large, have turned their backs on the faith that made the nations of Europe what they once were. And they look only to the recent tradition of the Enlightenment. And we are on the verge of taking that step, because we also have lost our sense of direction. We have lost the ability to think in the categories of the Catholic faith. There is no longer such a thing as the Christian mind. It doesn't exist anymore. Why? Because it doesn't influence anyone, neither the politicians nor the legislators. That's how you know. And you have Christians, so-called, who can actually entertain, at the same time, contradictory ideas in their own minds. Oh yes, I believe in God, and I can be a good Catholic, but I can also vote pro-abortion. There's a problem here, a serious one. The hierarchy are reluctant, as I said earlier, to give the lead. There are some, but not too many. The people, though, have lost faith in their leaders. So they also are ripe for exploitation and manipulation at the hands, I'll say it, of a largely hostile media. I've lived out of Ireland for just over 30 years. It's so easy to see. You're shocked when you return. You're not shocked so much by the levels of obesity. That's just obvious, you know. But you're shocked at what you see and what you hear, what you read, especially when it comes from the mouth sometimes of your closest friends. Relativism, therefore, has conquered the intellectual battleground despite its shallowness and lack of logical rigor. Alan Bloom, an American professor, in his rich and absorbing book, The Closing of the American Mind, highlights this all-pervasive phenomenon when he categorically affirms there is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of: almost every student entering the university, wish to God I hadn't put those glasses on, I've lost my place, entering the university believes or says he believes that truth is relative. If this belief is put to the test, one can count on the student's reaction. They will be uncomprehending. That anyone should regard the proposition as not self-evident astonishes them, as though he were calling into question 2 + 2 = 4. These are things you do not think about. And again, he captures the spirit behind this novel way of thinking, or non-thinking, when he throws into relief a concomitant element of relative theorizing. Now, the danger they have been taught to fear from what they call absolutism is not error, but intolerance. Relativism is necessary to openness, and this is the virtue, the only virtue, which all primary education for more than 50 years has dedicated itself to inculcating. I taught for 14 years, I know what I'm talking about. Openness and the relativism that makes it the only plausible stance in the face of various claims to truth and various new ways of life and different new kinds of human being, I'm talking gender issues here, is the great insight of our lives. I've lived almost 70 years to be astounded by this new insight. The true believer is the real danger. You guys, you're the real danger. So are you. You're associated with that. The study of history and of culture teaches that all the world was mad in the past. Men always thought they were right, and that led to wars, persecution, slavery, xenophobia, racism, and chauvinism. Okay, maybe. The point is not to correct the mistakes and really be right. Rather, it is to think you are right at all. This is where we are. There is no real truth left. And these young people, the future intelligentsia and leaders of our country, have been indoctrinated with these notions. It's a sort of new first principle, which is self-evident and needs no proof. It's beyond proof. It is simply for all men of all times. You know, give them an example. Let's take an example from the British Raj in India. When her husband died, it was the custom that the wife was to throw herself on the funeral pyre as well. Well, I'm just asking you, would you encourage that in practice? Oh, you married people, I'd rather you didn't answer that. But you probably would say, well, no, but they don't have an answer, neither yes nor no. They probably would say something like, well, the British never should have been there in the first place, just like in Ireland, you know. This is not a political party broadcast for Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or Sinn Féin. I'm just using it as an example, that's all. Now, this crisis has also penetrated its way into religious bodies. This grave error now prevails and extends its influence throughout the Catholic world, and especially, it has to be said, in Ireland. Just read the statement of the Association of Catholic Priests in Ireland on this issue of abortion. It was mentioned to me at table by Father Griego today at lunch. Just read it. Well, I know who some of them are, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. And yet, yeah, one is sort of shocked. The opposing forces, ourselves, are minimal in terms of strength, and the liberal establishment is growing stronger as the chaotic, turbulent years roll on. Their voices are stronger in the higher institutes of learning, both secular and religious, and are largely responsible for the change in attitudes that oppose Catholic teaching on abortion. The relativity of truth, the rejection of absolute truth, of any truth, applicable universally to all in every situation, is not just a theoretical insight. It has become a moral postulate. It's now the sine qua non condition of a free, a democratic, pluralistic, modern Irish society. It is only in such a society that abortion could ever possibly come to the foreground, be persuasively argued for, and almost unconsciously accepted. This fight can be won. This fight is winnable. But this fight can only be won when we reach out to our neighbor, where we try in all courtesy and politeness to use the powers of our God-given reason to point out to people the terrible inconsistency and the contradictory nature of the slogans they've been asked to swallow. One example, compassion. So the new definition of compassion from me is now that I can dismember the infant in the womb, limb from limb, and have the comfort of not hearing its screams. That is compassion. Where is the human dignity in that? Where is the caring in that? These are empty, facile slogans, but they do betray a way of thinking that is not only foreign to Christianity in Ireland, but to the very innate nature of what it means to be an Irish man or an Irish woman. I'll leave it there.